It's officially part three in the video series of whatever I'm doing. Today, something a little bit more incendiary than usual happened, or at least more incendiary from the standpoint of how the media would cover it, and it relates to political violence, potential deaths associated with politics, and those are never fun. But the reason I'm making this video is to talk about the political violence that we don't see, the political violence that we don't cover, and the political violence that we ignore. Fundamentally, politics is a decision about who gets what resources and who experiences what kind of violence for whatever reason they experience that violence. Politics is politics is bigger than governments even, because politics is kind of like the process we use to come at these types of decisions. And an important thing that I think is missing from the media discourse about political violence is the fact that political violence is ongoing, and political violence is primarily structural. It's not any more violent when a person dies because a particular individual had an axe to grind against them and then did something about it. That's not any more violent than when ICE rounds up tens of thousands of people and many of them fall ill and die in custody. One of these is not less or more violent on the merits. There's nothing more extreme about the idea that an individual decided to take on this violence. But we do feel like that. And I think a big part of that is, Americans, we do have an individualistic culture. But there's more at play as well. Because it would be one thing if it was the case that we came and we all, freaked out when, these sorts of, one-off type of political violent incidences occur. But that's not the case. It's not the case. I mean, just look at Michigan. Look at Michigan just, I don't know, maybe a month or so back, maybe a month or 2 months earlier in the summer. I think it was at least three people, or at least two people died, a lawmaker and their husband, in Minnesota. And look, just think about how that was covered. Think about how much you know about that. You don't know these lawmakers' names. Yeah, they didn't have this public status, and they weren't. The president didn't tweet consolation to them. The entire political, the entire political media establishment didn't come together to say, hey, this is important that we condemn this in the same way that is happening today. And the reason being, there's two different types of political, or really there's two different types of politics taking place in this country. You have politics as exercised by the government itself, but then you have within the public, within the people, two completely different perspectives on what violence means and how it should be wielded. And you don't need to look any further than a day like January 6th, 2021, for an example. You had so many people, so fucking many people there, ready, ready to enact whatever kind of violence they saw as necessary to get the outcome that they wanted. And the outcome they wanted was to overthrow the fucking government and make sure Donald Trump was elected when he lost the election. That's psycho shit, isn't it? It's crazy. It's not a reasonable ask, not a reasonable thing to happen. But that's what happened on January 6th. And that is the right wing politics in America. Whereas on the left, there is a much lower tolerance of violence, and I think this is motivated out of or at least for like explicit violence in the same type of way, this sort of, let's get together and kill somebody type of violence. On the left, this isn't a thing that really exists. And what that ultimately creates is a dynamic where you have one side of the political spectrum that's completely and totally willing to use violence, whether cynically, whether structurally, whatever they got to do. Just, fuck it. If violence is involved, violence, it happens. It happens. When you use ICE to round up and make people leave their own country, that's violence. It's extremely violence. It's extreme violence. There is no left-wing equivalent. We can't even say billionaires are bad without seeing, Zorhan Mamdani scares me, written from the Hamptons, and about how the farmers markets are, who the fuck knows what these people even complain about. But there's no direction. There's nowhere for left-wing violence to be directed, is really my point. Is that left-wing violence, it exists in this like hypothetical space. Luigi Mangione is really the only recent example of that. And we see how he was handled culturally. It's not like there was in terms of, like, again, the political media establishment, there was no embrace of Luigi Mangione. But we've got the right wing much more comfortable with using violence, and the left wing that's not. And so what happens when the right wing is a victim of this sort of explicit political violence, not the structural violence that's always happening that everyone is seems to be willing to ignore. But this sort of this vigilante one-off assassination type of violence. What happens when the right wing is victim of it, as opposed to perpetrators of it? Because we have Paul Pelosi, who was beat over the head with a hammer in front of police officers by David DePape, a fucking Canadian, if I remember correctly, and this was mocked relentlessly by the right wing, all online, all over the place. What happens when the right wing is victim? Well, again, these people are comfortable with violence, but they're also not. They don't care. They're comfortable with violence. When violence happens to them, it's not a tragedy because the violence is taking place. It's a tragedy because they are victimized by it. And the response, therefore, is one that focuses not on preventing future violence, but on directing violence more carefully in the future. That's very dangerous. It's very dangerous because you can't have one group of or one part of the political body of the United States completely and totally comfortable with violence and willing to weaponize their own experiences with violence for the purpose of furthering the very same violence that they are using as an excuse for why they need to be more violent. That's crazy. It's crazy. It's a spiral, and it's kind of done at that point. What I think people on the left in American politics should do is be aware of this. These people aren't playing the same game. They're not playing the same game. They don't care. If I die right now, if a fucking sniper, if fucking Mossad like lasers into the kafia in my room and blows up this whole damn apartment building. Matter of fact, all of Isla Vista could go away. And I really don't imagine we're gonna see a fucking Greg Abbott tweet about how tragic it is for the lives lost in California. I don't see it. I don't see it. And that needs to be recognized, because when that's not recognized, all you get is this: you allow them to win, you allow them to successfully, cynically deploy violence, and you obscure what violence really is. Violence is happening all around us constantly, and it's mostly perpetuated by our economic system. Our economic system tells millions and millions of people that they need to starve. They need to starve because it's more important for them to pay rent than it is to feed themselves. Our economic system tells people that, fuck it. I mean, who cares about like being a good person? Who cares about showing up for your children? Who cares about showing up for your family? Who cares about being involved in your community? You're gonna die if you don't make more money. So go make more money. That's violent. It's blackmail. It's extortion, and it's evil. And to be truly against violence is to be against all of this violence. But instead of that, we have one political side in the country, the left side, which is against this explicit sort of violence, this icky violence that makes you feel bad. We have another side that doesn't give a fuck about the violence whatsoever. They don't, and they're willing to pretend they do when it's useful to them. But it doesn't matter. It's immaterial. Oh, maybe Charlie Kirk's down. I'm so sad. I mean, how many more billionaires are willing to fund the future of right wing media? And it's not like we can use this tragedy as a marketing point. They can, and they will. But in light of these recent events, I really do hope more people take up that understanding that this is not about political violence. Because if it was about political violence, then we would be doing something about political violence. People would be talking about political violence, but they're not. They're talking about one individual. They're talking about one individual, and maybe they'll mention Michigan. It's a good seasoning now. It makes you feel nice and balanced. But they're not talking about violence. They don't care about violence. Do you really care about violence? If you do, doing something about it requires more than recognizing this as a tragedy. It requires recognizing it as a tragedy every time somebody's benefits are cut, for example, and they can't feed themselves. Recognizing it as a tragedy every time a person's denied health care, and then they just refuse to go to the doctor. They can't go to the doctor. They figure it's too much of a hassle. Then they die of a preventable condition later on in their lives. These are the real tragedies, and it's silly. It's really silly to watch everyone freak out over this multi-millionaire propagandist who is doing nothing but trying to build support for the burgeoning fascist movement in America. So, yeah, violence, isn't it fun?